What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Star Wars Explained. I'm Alex, and today we've got a new author interview. Low Red Moon came out earlier this week, so I spoke with Mike Chen about writing it. We talk about how playing video games is very important research, the pressures of writing the galaxy's sexiest droid, how to write very violent set pieces without crossing the line, and a ton of other fun stuff. So here's our full talk. We do get into some spoilers near the end, but I promise I give you plenty of warning before that happens. Enjoy. So how you doing, Mike?
I am doing as well as things could be in January of 2026.
I understand that. Well, I'm really glad that we're about to get Low Red Moon out in shelves. I had a great time reading it. I'm excited to talk to you about it. I'd love to just right away ask you about preparation for a book like this. Mm-hmm. Was it just a lot of video gaming?
I did beat the game before, or I think I got through like at least half of it, but then I beat the game like as I was starting drafting. So with Star Wars books, there's like a 2-month process where you kind of do the revision of a synopsis and like various, like the story team, the editorial team, like they will give you notes about like try to expand this or we want to move here. And so this synopsis grows and grows over several iterations. And so during that's when I started. They gave me a code, like I got to start playing it, I think about a week before the game came out. And then I finished it probably, I think it took about 3 months or so. But like, the main thing with playing the game was voice, actually. Like the really important thing was like, who is Jaylen, who is ND5? And as much fun as I was having, like zooming around Tatooine and taking pictures, because I did a lot of that, that's not really relevant to this story. It was important, I think, there are moments. The structure of the book is kind of riffing off of a game structure, and I wanted to take like how I saw the game kind of like unfolding with like missions and using the different elements of the underworld. I definitely wanted to like consciously download that into the book, but it was mostly about voice work and trying to understand like this is the endpoint for these characters. Like my book has to end where ND and Jaylen, where they are emotionally and Outlaws. So how do we get there? How do we back up from that?
I can definitely tell that you spent a lot of time focusing on voice, because just ND5 especially, I mean, he was my favorite part of that game. So I just felt like you nailed ND all the way through. But it was cool to see kind of the earlier version of him before he becomes the ND we know in the game. What was it like developing that, like taking a step backward from that character?
It was harder than I thought it would be at first, because when we see, like, we debated like where are we going to necessarily start, but it made sense that like ND is basically goes from like his previous memory is he's fighting in the Clone Wars, and then he wakes up and suddenly the war is over and he's been going to be asked to like do something else. So it was like he is a battle droid. He does not have these years of memories of, building XP in interacting with humans or, other organics, of like doing things, underworld style. It's very much like General Grievous says the orders, it gets communicated downwards. He teams up with other commando droids and they do this thing. One of the interesting things that's kind of riffed on lightly in the book, but it is very intentional, is the idea that BX commando droids typically work in teams, whether they're like other BX droids or they can be like with the B1 droids, but like there is a team element to it. And so to play that out where, ND no longer has his prime directive of like being an assassin droid for the separatists. So where does that go? Because there's like there's no function to fulfill, but then also he's missing the team element that he's used to. So not only is he like lacking, like he cannot fulfill his purpose, and he's lacking his usual means of execution. So how does Jaylen fill in that, but then also have like this I really liked your review, your non-spoiler review, where you called it like the toxic version of Han and Chewie. And when I heard them, like, that is completely correct, because like they're so close to like possibly, like, you can feel it, like you're
Yeah.
getting so close to like the healthy relationship, and then circumstances keep turning on them and they can't quite get out of it. And so how do you build to that? How do you give them enough ground where they are clearly working well together, but then something always happens like right before they can make that final turn?
It fits so well with like the very first chapter about Jaylen. You show he's not heartless. He
Yeah.
has feelings for his brother, but he's only willing to go so far to help him. And
I,
it's like there's something that's holding him back.
I think it was really important, like that we talked about how do we open the book. And I pitched, having it open with this prologue of Jaylen and Qi'ra as young children, because that sets the model of how destructive like this horrible oligarch family is, like, and just how crushing the parents are, because like you have to have something emotional to lock onto in order to have Jaylen be the one of the two protagonists in the book. So it's really important to see that he wants to do better. He's always wanted to do better. He's always wanted to look out for his brother, but he doesn't know how. And he doesn't have any, like, he's got this valet named Bren Coyle, who is named after Brendan Coyle, the actor from Downton Abbey, who is like the guy who's always like brushing the shoulders and stuff. He can't. Bren Coyle can't get quite emotionally attached because he's like he's an employee of the Barsha family. So as much as he tries to, in those few scenes you see with Jaylen and Bren Coyle, he can't be the mentor that Jaylen needs. So it was really important to establish that very early on in the prologue, where you see as children that at Jaylen's heart, if he had the right mentorship and the right opportunities, he could be a very, very caring brother and a very good friend and family member. And he's almost there, but he has no resources. He has no tools. He has no role models to help with that. And so that was really important for you to start building sympathy in the relationship. And then you see him keep trying to break out of this trap that his parents have, or this cage that his parents have put him in. And I mean, I think there's so many real world examples of the ultra rich and ultra clueless people, like even the ones with good hearts, still like they can't get it until something massively personal happens to them. And that's where Jaylen is at, and unfortunately no one can pull him out of his spiral.
Yeah, can you talk a little more about his family? I remember looking through your Blue Sky thread that you shared about the book when it was announced, and it seemed like you were comparing the Barshas to the Rose family from Schitt's Creek.
Yeah.
So is that the case, and how did that come about?
It was, so we were talking very early on, me and Gabby and Tom over at Random House Worlds, and we were talking about, like, we have to. It's established in canon, like, minor spoiler, I think, for the game, that like the Barsha family, it was like this. They're like, I jokingly told Tom and Gabby, they're like the Lockheed of Star Wars, and they get taken down. And so what is that like for people who are like CEO, like generational wealth level in Star Wars, to just have everything taken from them? And so the first thing, when we started kind of brainstorming this, the first thing I think about is like the opening minutes of Schitt's Creek, where the Rose family is like standing around like the lobby of their mansion. People are like taking stuff out of it, and Moira Rose is just like having this epic meltdown. And so to put that into Star Wars, because we've seen like political elites, we haven't seen too much of like the corporate elites. So I thought, okay, well, this is a really interesting way to see how there's talk in there where like Roysam Barsha, which is Jaylen's mom, talks about how like Empire, Republic, it doesn't really matter. It's just a name. We're still building these ships. We're still employing 1 million, 2 million beings across the galaxy. Our ships or ships across the galaxy all fly on parts. So they feel they're invincible. They're like, and they think that like because they are so embedded in the infrastructure of transportation in the galaxy, like nothing can happen to them. And so because of that, their whole family is like just lost in this delusional bubble. And so it was like in Schitt's Creek, they moved to Schitt's Creek and they discover their hearts. And unfortunately for the Barshas, they discovered ND5.
I'll save that for we'll talk about some spoilers a little later, but man, that part of that book, that's when I was like just leaning all the way, and that was so sick.
I'm kind of surprised at how dark they let me go with that.
You talked about how you kind of got this job because you were writing Venom for Marvel, and that prepared you to write for ND5. So I know who Venom is, but I'm not super knowledgeable. So how are the two characters similar? What was it about that What If book that made everyone go like, that's exactly what we need?
So the book is what if Mark Spector, who is Moon Knight, what if Mark Spector was host of Venom? And so Venom is a symbiote like that, like needs a host. Venom's an alien from like way out in space, but like will latch onto a host. And the Venom has a very strong personality, but also kind of absorbs a little bit of whoever Venom's host is. In the book, so for people who don't know about Moon Knight has dissociative identity disorder. So Moon Knight, the standard or like the most traditional version of Moon Knight has 3 of them. It's Stephen, Mark, and Jake. And they, so in that book, I played with perspective where Stephen Grant, who has like the strongest voice, especially riffing off of the Moon Knight TV show with Oscar Isaac. I wrote that one in first person. Jake and Mark are more like tough, like traditionally tough dudes. And they're third person. And then Venom, I put in second person. And I pitched that because Venom is very alien. And at the start of the journey in that book, Venom's trademark snarky personality isn't quite there yet, and you learn why it's kind of under duress. And then through bonding with Moon Knight, it starts to come out. And that's kind of where we were going with ND5, where like writing Venom in second person, like on a clear mission to do something, created these sort of like narrative constraints about like what I could do with his voice. And then with ND5, it's the same thing. Like he is coming out of a war. He's in this very strange circumstance for him. And he's got like these set of like protocols that he's got to fulfill. And so he's got to evolve from being a commando droid to someone who can be a reliable partner in the underworld. So it was like kind of looking at that and like seeing how I could take a voice and very non-human elements and put them into something that has an arc. And so that Gabby was my editor on the Moon Knight and Venom book. And so when they reached out to my agent, Gabby said specifically, we want kind of what you did with Venom, except do it for the sexy droid.
And that's so interesting. I had no idea about the perspective shifts in that book because I was noticing that Jaylen is all third person and ND5 is all first person.
Yeah,
so that's really interesting that's kind of getting more and more into Indy's head. That was a cool choice.
That was very intentional because the idea of like looking at if you're going to have a droid perspective for an entire book. It's not just a few chapters, but it's like, it is basically 50% of the book. There's going to be a lot of like droid processing that is important to moving the narrative forward. And you can't really show that in a third person view. Like it's all like internal, like what is like, there are moments in the prose where you get like these brackets and it'll be like file deleted or something like that, where it's like it is a computer process, and you can't really describe that in third person. It would have to say something like ND5 stuttered because his memory could not be located, which
Sure.
doesn't feel quite as like visceral as like, there's ND's thought process and then suddenly like file deleted. That makes it feel much more immediate. So the other thing with putting ND in first person was that you'll probably notice that while ND has about half of the chapters, ND's chapters are often shorter than Jaylen's. And it's because ND does not quite have like the inner monologue. And that's by design. He's a droid that through experience is developing a personality. So especially at the beginning, his prose is much shorter. It's much more like exact, and then it starts to build a little bit more as ND grows. And so that's all by design. And it seemed like the only choice to do that was first person.
That's so cool. That's just so cool. What about Jaylen? What was the decision behind making him all third person?
It was mostly like, third person is pretty traditional, like in Star Wars. I know not everyone does the sort of like third person close perspective that I used in my other work. Sometimes they do like the omniscient third person. I do third person close in pretty much everything. And it felt important that, like, because your two perspectives are Jaylen and ND5, to stay close to Jaylen but still have third person description, it felt really important that you were close enough that you can kind of start to see like where Jaylen is faltering, and he's starting to lie to himself, or in addition consciously lie to ND or everyone else to try to get what he wants, but the justifications have to be there. So you have to be in his head, but the presentation of third person is really important because it has to be a stark contrast to ND5 from just like a pacing perspective.
That's interesting. I was kind of reading it and I saw it as a way that every time I read an ND chapter, I was like more and more connected with him, getting his thoughts. And it felt like Jaylen just keeping me at arm's length because like he won't let anyone get that close.
That's kind of his problem.
Yeah. On Blue Sky, you pointed out that this might be the first novel to have a droid's first person perspective in Star Wars. So did that present any unique challenges? Were there things that came up with the story group where you were like, well, we got to figure this out?
Yeah. So I wasn't sure about that. And Gabby is the one who actually said that as far as she knew, like it is the longest, like in terms of percentage of a book, it has like the most amount of a droid perspective. And so with that, the story group was like, well, this is going to kind of be the template if we're going to do more droid stories. So we have to figure out like how much internal processing is going to be in there. Like, how are we going to format it? Like, there were discussions about like, how do you want to format the font whenever like those brackets come up? Little things like that. So there was actually a lot of talk about like how much self-awareness should be in the prose. And it's not just from a character perspective, but also from what the reader typically expects, because you don't want it to read like you're just reading like lines of code. Like there has to be like a sense of pace and a sense of character in there, even though like technically from, if you were just looking directly into ND5's brain, it would be a lot of just like codes and actions. So how do you translate that to something that doesn't feel too computery? And so there were moments, Tom was actually really helpful in kind of dissecting where like he would say, like he'd leave comments in there about like, this is too computery. And then other times he could be like, you can linger here a little bit more. So we would shift things where it would be like, I consider where this memory block is and I run a query to search for it and I cannot find it, like something like that. And then Tom's note would be like, this is too computery. You can truncate it down to like, I cannot find what I need. And it punches it through, but it's still in that sort of like detached droid sort of way. So there was I think I wrote like 2 or 3 ND chapters first. Once we got the synopsis put together, I sent that over to everyone to be like, this, beta read this. Like, what do you think of the voice? What do you think of like the mechanics in place? And then we just kind of grew it from there. But it was definitely an iterative process.
That's so cool, and that's part of the reason I love doing these interviews. Is like I never would have thought that's a lot of pressure to
Yeah.
write like the template for first person droids moving forward. It's not just this book. You're like thinking about the future too. It's a
Yeah.
lot.
There was definitely a moment where I was like, if I screw this up, I'm going to screw it up for everyone.
No, you didn't. The indie chapters were awesome. On top of that, you had this pressure of writing the galaxy's sexiest droid. So
Yes.
what was that like? How are you feeling going into knowing that?
It was, I saw the trailers for Outlaws just like everyone else did. I saw everyone just like freak out. And if you search for like ND5 Outlaws, like there's still like the top hits on there are about like meet the internet's new thirsty droid. Like there are tons of articles about that. So I knew that like whatever people thought of the story, like there's going to be a lot of people who are coming in because they love the character, and especially like after playing more of the game, I'm like, this seems to be like the takeaway. Most people's takeaway from the game is, like he's their favorite character coming out of it. I think people kind of knew that too, like on the development team. It was like, every property or like game or show or whatever, like you kind of get a sense of like who's going to be like the fan favorite coming out of that. And I got the sense that like they were prepared for ND5. And so when I was writing the pitch, this got a lot of notoriety on social media, but deservedly so. I included a moment where I said, like in the notes, I said, picture Daniel Craig rising from the ocean in Casino Royale, but it's ND5, throwing like strips of seaweed off of him as he like emerges. And Tom joked in his notes, he's like, this should be the special edition poster right there.
Yeah.
But I'm like, are they going to let me keep it? Because it's kind of overt. But I think it fit the moment. It's kind of like when you hear stories of how Raiders of the Lost Ark was made, and like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas talked about like, we want these set pieces and then we'll kind of build things around that. I knew I wanted to have ND like emerge from the ocean for some reason, like Daniel Craig in Casino Royale. So I built the action sequence kind of around that, where like that is going to be the end point. So it was very intentionally a nod to the fans of like sexy droids everywhere.
Oh, that makes so much sense because like there's 3 parts to this book, and each one, the climax of each part is just this rad action sequence. So that makes complete sense to me that you kind of had these ideas in mind. I also just want to commend you on the pacing of the book, because I remember I was like 5 chapters in and I was just like, I can't believe how much has already happened. And getting to that first part climax, that ND5 scene that we'll talk about later, I was like, this could have been the end of the book, but we're a third of the way through. So
what's interesting about that, and so like I talked about how I was kind of looking at game structure with that, and everything's kind of built that way with like a quest on a game where it's like you usually like you kind of have to do some reconnaissance, or you have to gather some items, or you have to go here or there, and then like you start kind of getting into like these points of no return, and then you have the boss fight. And so it was trying to mirror that sort of pacing along with it. And with the with the pacing of Outlaws in particular, like there's definitely like there's moments of stealth, there's moments of like it's just a firefight, there's moments of like it's got to be an infiltration, and so I kind of wanted to take like different types of missions that you encounter in Outlaws and then graft it into this book in a way that like felt natural for like the rest of the prose that was around there, but also definitely felt different than like with Brotherhood. It was like the intention is to feel like a Clone Wars episode. With this, it was to feel like, okay, here's 3 DLCs for this game.
I like the idea that you kind of went into this as DLC. I think that sometimes fans can be cynical about getting like backstory books, but yeah, like Low Red Moon totally adds on to the story of Outlaws. But we've also kind of talked about how much you add, like just how much world building there is, where
Mhm.
you're fleshing out the underworld and the lifestyles of the rich and famous, or
Yeah.
what the ISB is doing at this point in time. So what is the process for fleshing out like a backstory book and then bringing it to life with all these other details?
It's asking a lot of permission. So this was the synopsis for this was being written, I think it was August, September 2024. So Andor season 1 had happened. Andor season 2 had not yet. But I loved like the machinations of the ISB. And based on the game, we know the ISB is going to be involved in Jaylen's story. So how could I bring that in? So I looked at what, because you need a MacGuffin for everything. You can't just have like a direct conflict between Jaylen and the ISB. You have to save that for what's going to happen later on in the game. So it was looking at what are the elements that have not quite been defined yet, but what would make practical sense from like an imperial surveillance perspective, and it's got to kind of fill into the idea of that, like, we're riffing off of like a mostly stealth game. Like it's open world, but there's a lot of stealth in there, so it made sense, especially as Jaylen is trying to get away from his previous life, that was in a very public role. He's going to have to undergo like some stealth decisions. So with the ISB, I kind of proposed like, this seems logical for a sort of public surveillance protocol for the agency, and because we know that the Empire loves bureaucracy, breaking it down into like, how do they do this? Like, it's by geographic region. There's only so much time they're going to give people within like a rotation of it. Part of it was I needed certain logistics to work out for the story to provide constraints for the antagonists in there. But then you have to build that out into something that feels really logical. So it's like, okay, would the Empire just want to plant someone in a like undercover surveillance spot forever? And like, no, you probably wouldn't, because that person could get bored or they could slip. So I introduced the idea of like, looking at they're building off of their undercover agents are building off of like their real world experience, and they're going to rotate every certain amount of time, and they're going to have some layers of security to protect their identity, because the galaxy is vast and the underworld is nasty. And with the rich and famous thing, it was touching on what we talked about earlier, where like this has to exist in Star Wars because we've seen it in many different areas. I think back to in Revenge of the Sith, at the opera scene, when you see the people going into the opera, and I remember like the first time you see that, like we hadn't seen that in Star Wars before, like that level of like opulence in a different way from like Naboo, which is just a really pretty world, but like this is like almost garish levels of opulence in like, especially during a time of war. And so thinking about like who would be attending that sort of thing, like a gala in the middle of the Clone Wars, that sort of thing. And, are they kind of jerks? Like, yeah, like we have many real world examples of people who are just so out of touch because their wealth provides them this insulation. So that has to exist in Star Wars. We've seen snippets of it. And so getting really up close to, the ugly of it, that was a lot of fun.
Speaking of the ugly, you kind of touched on the HoloNet a little bit.
Yeah.
And you wrote about like Corellian tabloids that are putting out sensational listicles and whatever happened to articles.
Yeah.
Do you see the HoloNet as like the Star Wars equivalent to our internet, or what fun did you have playing with that?
I was given some constraints because like the HoloNet, depending on like where like what story has and presents it, like it's kind of squishy. Like sometimes it's more like the internet, sometimes it's more like TV channels, and I think part of that is based on our own evolving sense of like technology and communication. So I try to, like, we know there's newspapers like in some form, they're like readable on tablets. And so I looked on Wikipedia to see like what are the most prominent newspapers in Star Wars, and like the Corellian Times gets mentioned in other stuff. Coruscant, I forget the name of Coruscant, but like Coruscant has one. And so knowing that you've got this, we know there are broadcast journalists. I think about like, they've been seen in the background, like on some broadcasts, and like, I know Andor had a little bit of them. Attack of the Clones, like when they go into the bar, and they're watching sports on the video screens, and there's like, there's people talking about it. So there is an infrastructure of journalism in there. So it's taking that and then thinking like they're not all going to be reporting on the war. They're not all going to be reporting on, oh, now it's the Empire. Like, how has that changed business? It's going to have a lot of the same dumb stuff that we have. And the Empire would, and traditionally in authoritarian times, like the government wants to give you like this sanitized, filtered, happy, dumb, content to keep you comfortably numb. And so to look at that and be like, what would the Empire actually do within the practical limitations of like, they've got a bureaucracy, they've only got, even the Empire only has so many resources, like they can't control everything. So how are they going to try to direct this flow of information? So it's unfortunately parallel to a lot of things in the real world, but it provided good fodder for, I hope, if someone hasn't really thought about that before, hopefully it will give them a little nudge.
Well, I want to start talking about spoilers when this comes out. The book will have been out for a little bit. But before we do, I wanted to touch on your research, and in your acknowledgments, you talked about getting to play the game with your daughters. So were there any memories that popped up during that experience?
My daughter, not surprisingly, loved Nyx. I love
Sure.
Nyx.
Everyone loves Nyx.
Yeah, and so we every time I found a kitchen station to order new food for Nyx, like I made sure, like I promised her, like I will not feed Nyx unless you are here. So I would do everything else, and then like whenever she came home from school or whatever, we would feed Nyx together and make the choices together. And so that was probably like the most fun. But like she would just watch, like I would be playing on the PlayStation and she would be playing Breath of the Wild or whatever on her Switch, but she would just watch me infiltrate and then sometimes comment about like, you keep dying. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But I think like, especially Tatooine, she liked exploring, like on Tatooine. She liked just watching me like take the bike around and like, seeing like what's just over that dune, like, oh, look, there's the sand crawler, or like, here's not Lars homestead, but a homestead, those sorts of things. I think she appreciated kind of like the unprecedented like level of immersion that the game presented compared to like the Jedi series is like very pushing you through like specific areas and story elements, whereas this is like, you want to go around Tatooine for 4 hours and take pictures, let's do it. And so she loved K, she loved Nyx, she loved ND5, but there was the element of just like, we're exploring Star Wars, and I think she really, really liked that.
Does she think it's cool that her dad writes Star Wars stories?
It is. I think I like to think that she does, but she can't tell me. However, her friends think it's really cool. She has one friend who's just like super into Marvel, and so I gave him a copy of the Moon Knight and Venom book. I was not expecting him to read it, but like a week later at school pickup, he's like, "Hey, I finished your book. It was so good." I'm like, "Oh, cool." My daughter actually thinks that I am cool because I am friends with Delilah Dawson, and Delilah Dawson wrote
Yeah.
wrote 3 of her favorite Minecraft books, and so
Oh,
I am cool by association. And it's not because she like she loves Star Wars. We've seen, you know, like so much of the canon together. But I think she just can't admit that, you know, I'm doing a pretty cool job.
I'm
Maybe
sure.
later.
I'm sure she thinks. Yeah, I think you're cool.
Thanks.
Well, I am going to jump into some spoilers now. If people haven't finished the book yet, this is your warning. Brought it up a couple times already, but ND5's rampage through the Barsha compound
Mhm.
might be my favorite part of the book. That it makes him even scarier in Outlaws when he loses control and you have to run from him. Can you just talk about creating that sequence?
Yeah. Well, you know what's funny? So you say like that's your favorite part of the book. I think I have heard equally from early readers like an equal distribution of like I love the ND5 and the Schitt's Creek part. I love the like underworld part at the end, or I loved like the tension of the heist. So I'm like, I must have gotten it right if like it's equal parts, you know, that the people enjoyed the most.
That's great.
So the first thing was like, you know, I looked at the body count here and I was like, we're going to have to kill a lot of people. Like, you know, this doesn't really happen in Star Wars storytelling. Like on, you know, it's usually, you know, at the end of Rogue One, like Vader is just massacring people, but there's a level of cartoonishness to it. Whereas like this is like murder.
Yeah.
It's like, and it's first person murder too. So we talked about like, how graphic do we make it? And so I actually wrote I wrote a sample version of this so we could kind of like tweak like the levers on how graphic we make it. And the main point, so I jokingly say that the first part of the book is Schitt's Creek meets the Bourne identity.
Sure.
And the Bourne part came from Tom, where we were talking about like how graphic to make it and how cold and clinical to make it. And Tom was like, ND5 is an assassin droid. Like, so it's like, he said, like, think about like, you're Jason Bourne, you're coming to kill you. I'm like, okay, we can do that. And Tom was like, but it has to be without malice. This is his assignment. So we talked about the idea, like in Indy's internal monologue, as terrifying as it is, he's just like taking in circumstances and adapting. So like if people are freaking out, you know, as like, you know, someone sees him murder someone else, it's like he just takes that as like environmental feedback and he's got to adapt to it. So it was talking about like how to ND, like one of my favorite parts is when he comes across like the dude bro cousin who's like standing on the cliff and he's just drunk and obnoxious and ND just like tosses him over. It had to be as clinical as like you or I sending an email or like uploading a spreadsheet, because like it is just his function. Like he doesn't take pleasure in like taking out the annoying drunk dude bro. And so with that, there's a mix of like, I believe up until like they all get in the locked room together, I think up until that, I think there's like 2 like on-screen assassinations, and the rest are like the bodies are discovered by Jaylen and this droid buddy. And so the idea was like, we just had to establish the bar of like, this is how clinical and cold ND will be, and brutal. Like when he hides the body by like tying it to a stone chair and just tossing it in the pool, it's like, oh, well, that's not very nice. But it's effective and it gets the job done. So doing enough of that where it doesn't seem like we're like reveling in the graphic nature of it, and instead it's so casually accomplished that it's like terrifying. And so what I was thinking about also too, with like the way that ND was like stalking the people around the compound, I was looking at like game experience. So I'm thinking like Metal Gear Solid or Assassin's Creed. So in those games, like you use the environment around you to hide bodies, or you can set traps, you know, you can use different equipment and things like that. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, there's a move that you can upgrade to, which is just a big kick. So if you're like, if you're on a cliff and you see your enemy, like you can sneak up behind him and just kick him off. And that's kind of what Indy does too, that one guy on the cliff of the island. So when I was like logistically pacing this out, I'm thinking about I'm playing Metal Gear Solid or I'm playing Assassin's Creed and kind of using that sort of same instinct, but then translating it to prose had to be like cold, clinical, and not afraid of cruelty, but not cruelty for cruelty's sake.
I love the way you said, yeah, you just had to set the bar, because I think part of what makes it so effective is the jumping back and forth and seeing Jaylen trying to catch up, or watching on the map as like dots are disappearing.
That was
like, that tension is so cool.
That scene, it I love scenes of like implied horrific violence. Like when done well, I think it carries more tension. And I think about this doesn't translate one for one, but like my favorite moment of that is, I think it's season 4 of Fargo, where you have an exterior tracking shot of a building, and it's just like sweeping from side to side across the windows, and you just hear like gunshots and screaming, and one guy gets tossed out of it, but you don't see much of the violence. It's just the exterior of a window, and you're going across the side, so it's like everything is implied. And so with the idea with the map, we actually had to talk about like how many sensors would actually be on this compound, and how do you make it so that it's not like Bluetooth, because you can't really have that in Star Wars just yet. So we talked about like the capability of the technology, but I really wanted to have that moment of, you see all the dots there representing the guests, and then they just start disappearing, because that's really scary when you're like, what is happening? Why are people just not there anymore? So I kind of had to reverse engineer how to do it, but it was that idea of like the unseen violence is scarier than the like seen violence.
Yeah, it's absolutely awesome. Kind of like the Jaws rule of not seeing the shark is
exactly
scarier than actually seeing it. Well, that's the first of the awesome action set pieces. I also wanted to talk about Fennec Shand's big moment sniping. So you got to bring Fennec into the novel.
Yes.
She's fantastic. I loved her picking people off while Jaylen is distracting everyone. I love that we can kind of piece together her career from the Bad Batch through Low Red Moon to the Mandalorian. So what did you consider as you were writing her at this kind of midpoint of her career?
She was, I think, my first ask from Lucasfilm when we started talking about who can I bring in. I mean, it's me, not when. I want to work with her character as much as possible. So I immediately requested it, and actually, I think it took the longest to get approval, because she's an active character, right now in media. I wanted to use her sniper skills, because it for a heist set piece, like that's really, really cool. And my favorite moments from boss fights in Metal Gear Solid involve sniper rifle. There's in Metal Gear Solid 2, there's a moment where you have to, like, you're protecting someone as they're crossing a bridge, and you're using the sniper scope from afar, and you have to pick people off, and you can do things like you can shoot, like you can make noise by someone to distract them and to allow a person to go through it. So I'm thinking about these sequences from stealth games and trying to put that into this moment, and of course Fennec is going to be really, really good at it. So it's kind of playing off of that sort of like unseen violence type of thing, where you're the point of view is Jaylen. Jaylen is talking. He sees the spread of people, but all you see is like there's not even any noise. It's just flash. That's the blaster shot, and then someone falls. And so I really I had that very strong visual in my head of like Fennec is picking people off from behind, so no one notices. So in her career, we talked about how that was I think the one note from Lucasfilm was that she can't be a master assassin yet, because time wise, we don't want to give her we wanted to be at the start of her career. So I kind of started to think of it as when you have an athlete who is just really starting to ascend into MVP level of quality. So I looked at Fennec, and I was trying to frame the discussion around her as like she is becoming in demand and becoming expensive, but she's not unavailable just yet. So that kind of establishes like where she is in her career. And then the other thing was just like, she's got this really sort of like dry approach to stuff, like when she talks, and it was really important to kind of get that, like, where she talks about like, I'm just here for a job. Like I don't care whether you achieve your goals or not. Like, you want me to shoot someone, I will shoot them. If you don't want me to shoot them, that's fine too. Just that's what she is. And so it was really cool to make sure that she's presented as, she is a team player, she is clinical, she is intimidating as hell. And to make sure everyone sees that, so you can see the like, oh, okay, she's kind of scary, and but like we will understand who she is by the time the Mandalorian comes around.
You also bring in Qi'ra for the third act, and that makes perfect sense considering her connection to Outlaws, but this is far earlier in the timeline, so like Dryden Voss is still around, of course. Maul is still around. Did you think about that she still has kind of superiors at this point in time? How did that affect her character, if it did at all?
We actually played around, like, do we want to do it pre-solo or post-solo? So we talked about that a little bit. I talked with E.K. Johnston quite a bit about where she thought Qi'ra was at, like right before solo, like emotionally. And so we ultimately landed on, like, there is a mention of Dryden Voss, and so that kind of establishes that, like, this is right before solo. We wanted Qi'ra to be scary and respected and confident, but because that's right. This is, I believe, the key point was that, like, this takes place on, the scene takes place on kind of like a sideways outpost, on the Corellian trade spine. And I forget who it was, but they said, like, if she is in charge, like on a Dryden Voss level, she might not be here, like overseeing like the logistics of, the extra munitions and other stuff. So that's why we pulled back. But she still had to be like just on the cusp where you knew that, like, once she got the opportunity that that she would do what needed to be done. So I thought it was really important that, like, she was established enough that, like, you have the characters whispering basically, don't cross her, like, she will mess you up.
Yeah.
And I had posted, I took some of the quotes from the book from characters, and I anonymized them. I posted them on Blue Sky as, like, just a little bit of a teaser. And I asked people to guess, and several people saw the Qi'ra quote, and they said, "Oh, I think that's Qi'ra." And I'm like, "Okay, I did that right."
That's great. You also brought in two characters of your own creation. So, what was it like to bring back Mill and Vivert? And I just have to. I love how they popped up in such a different story than Brotherhood, but it still felt natural, felt underworld, just felt good and right.
I can't tell you how many times people have asked me, like, did Mill survive Order 66? Yeah. And so it's like, part of it is like, I really want her to. I want her to be thriving. She's very important to me. So I asked. I was fully expecting, like, her role, like, could easily be moved laterally to someone else, but it was really important for me to at least ask. So once we got the basic story arc down, I thought, like, this support character who comes in the third part, like, it could work, because Jaylen needs to work with someone who's, like, in there but is probably a little bit more trustworthy than a lot of the underworld scum. So there is a sequel era comic written by Amanda Dibert that name drops Mill and Vivert. And Amanda and I are good friends. We schemed that together because Mill and Vivert are named after our daughters, who are also good friends, and despite living hundreds of miles apart, do so much Minecraft together. It's kind of obnoxious. So we were like, we can't let them die. So she name drops them as bounty hunters in the sequel era. And we came up with that, like, we were talking about it, and we were like, well, they wouldn't just be like, Boba Fett style bounty hunters, and so we kind of came up with the idea that like they're more like they're using that to fund like a Doctors Without Borders type of thing. Like they're providing relief wherever they can, but they're still under duress and working with the underworld. So that's how like I knew that was going to be like their endpoint. And so here it was just on a practical level, like I wanted to show them in action. And if you didn't know who they were, then they're just kind of like these cool people who come in. But if you knew who they were, it lines up from their sort of character arc of like they would not give up their values. You know, they would find a way to like not hide from the ugliness of the galaxy, but to keep trying to do something about it while trying to, you know, make a living, because you have to in the galaxy. So I was just really relieved that they let me do it.
I think you nailed that balance of if you don't know, it's fine, because it took me a second before it clicked and I was like, oh my God, that's Mill.
Did you pick it up from like the Zabrak part, or did you actually need the name in there?
I picked it up before the name drop, but
Yeah.
I was like, there's something familiar about this. And then like, I was like, oh, it's Mike Chen, of course. Like it just clicked for me, but not from the second she came into the scene.
Yeah, and that was really important, that like she had to exist in the story in a way that felt very like logical and fluid, and not like a big, you know, icon showing up that be like, hey, it's Mill, she's alive. Like it had to feel just natural in there, like for someone who would have a reason to be in there. And I wanted to make sure too that like she point out that she's not in there to help Jaylen until she's forced to. She's like on her own thing. So I kind of want it to be like when you run into an NPC playing Dungeons and Dragons, you know, like they're on their own thing, but they get pulled into the party for a few moments.
I really loved that it also allowed the Force to come into the story, but in this really coy, playful way, because Jaylen doesn't really know much about it. He doesn't know what Mill and Vibert can do. So that was super fun to read.
Yeah, he doesn't know, and he doesn't care. I think that's the more important thing, is like, you know, his during the Clone Wars, he was basically in college. You know, if you took like a college student who like went backpacking in Europe and just got drunk all the time, and like instead of being concerned about like the troubles at home, like they're doing that. That's kind of what Jaylen was doing during the Clone Wars. So it's like he doesn't care. We very explicitly did not want to call out the Force in any way, and I had to write the scenes where like if you knew the characters, you would get it. But otherwise, like if you're like purely reading this in like this is an underworld story and like they're probably kind of shifty or whatever, it's like it could be explained that way. And so to put Jaylen's perspective in there, because he doesn't know, it's like I think when Mill does, I think she does the Jedi mind trick where she like gets the blaster from the guard, and Jaylen like does not even notice. He's like, she's doing her thing. I need to talk to ND5 about like how are we going to escape. So it's like it's not even an issue for him. And I was thinking about when I was writing this, usually when we see people stealthily use Force powers, like the audience knows. So I'm sure it exists somewhere, but I can't think of any moments where it's like it's not ultimately revealed like, yes, that is a Jedi, or like that is your telltale sign that like they are a Jedi. It's not even mentioned in here. It's just like they use it like a skill in, you know, like pushing triangle on your PlayStation controller, but you don't know. So like if you're watching a stream of someone and you don't know the game and they're doing that, like you don't know. And so it had to be like very much like Jaylen doesn't know, doesn't care. ND5 does not pick up on it at all because like it's not part of his programming. So that was fun. I can't think of another perspective in the story where it's kind of presented that way, because you always know.
Yeah, I thought it was, again, written very well to the point where the audience knows exactly, oh, she just did a mind trick, and then like winks and says, I can be very persuasive. And it's just like, well, let's move on.
If you had no idea who they are, it's like, I imagine that a good percentage of readers just wouldn't, like, unless they're actively looking for that, like it could just pass them by. And that's the point. That's what a Jedi mind trick should do.
I wanted to shout out your own shout outs and your acknowledgments. You talk about other Star Wars writers like E.K. Johnston and Delilah Dawson and Madeline Rue. And I just love seeing how collaborative and supportive all of you seem to be. So can you talk about their insights? Like you said you spoke with EK about Qi'ra and her point in the timeline.
Yeah, with Qi'ra, it was important to like we discussed like some things that like we could take from Crimson Climb and be like, oh, this is going to gain Qi'ra notoriety in the underworld. And so it was really important to like grab a few elements of that. Like there's the thing with the like the ink. I am totally blanking on the species, but the ink that they use in Crimson Dawn. So she also picked Qi'ra's outfit. I just asked her like, what would Qi'ra be wearing like in this moment right here? With Delilah is my go-to with any Star Wars scene problem. I just text her and then be like, this is what's happening. What do you think? The biggest issue here was when they get to the Crimson Dawn outpost, there's a lot going on and it all has to be subtle. And so I asked Delilah, I was showing her like beat by beat, like what needs to happen. And I was like, can this technology actually do this? Am I overdoing it? Am I underdoing it? Like, what do you think the guards are going to be doing here? Like, would they actually be noticing it? So with Delilah, it was almost like taking, it's almost like if I'm the director of a movie, bringing in a friend to be like, how do you want to block this out? Like that sort of thing. So Delilah has just always been there for that. And then with Maddie, she was more big picture because her writing schedule for Legacy, I started mine about, I think, 3 or 4 months before hers. And so she was like on a synopsis level when I was drafting, and we were just like, cheering each other on and like, talking about like, what are your problems with this? And like, and so when I would encounter something, I'd be like, hey, I just need a second set of eyes. What do you think about doing it this way? And she would do that with me with a few other of her things. And so it was kind of like we're in the sort of like Lucasfilm circle where we can talk creatively about this and like not get, in trouble with it. And so like you need someone like that. But it's also like this very unique pressure of like, you've only got 3 months to do this. You got to get it right. And so to have other authors that, you can collaborate with and understand not just like the real world needs of this, but also like the galaxy that they love so much, and be able to like Delilah can instantly say like, no, I think that's too much computer stuff for Star Wars here. And I can trust that. So it's really important.
It's super cool that y'all have like this support system for each other.
They pick good people at Random House Worlds.
They really do. I mean, I've had the pleasure to interview a lot of Star Wars authors, and I've never had a bad experience with any of you. So
we're all pals. I think like when they announced Celebration at Los Angeles, I think it was like the first thing was like a bunch of us were texting each other. We're like, oh, we're going to get to hang out in LA and like not have to like see like who's going to fly to Japan. Like I'm not flying to Japan, but LA, like I can drive down there. So also shout out to Kelly Knox, who every time I had a damn world building question and I'm like, I can't find this, I would just text it to her. And sometimes like she would send me like photos from like, a DK, reference book, or she would just tell me like, oh, it's this and this. So like she really is a Jedi archivist.
That's awesome. Well, those are all my questions. So I'd love to give you a chance to just let everyone know where people can follow you online and maybe share some of your other Star Wars stories or non-Star Wars stories that you think some Star Wars fans would enjoy.
So I am most active on Blue Sky. I apologize for all of the political lobbying right now. It's January 2026. So I am Mike Chen writer there. I'm also Mike Chen writer on Instagram, which is mostly dog photos. So if you want to see photos of my dog, Jake the dog, for anyone who likes Adventure Time or Star Trek Deep Space Nine or Moon Knight, that's Jake. So there's a lot of photos of him. And my website is mikechenbooks.com, which I finally updated after 2 years. I realized, like, I looked at it and I was like, it says coming soon, Marvel's What If. I'm like, time has passed since then. So we have Star Wars Low Red Moon, and then in April I have a Star Trek inspired. I pitch it as Star Trek Deep Space Nine meets Mass Effect original space opera called The Photonic Effect. That comes out in April. In September, I am part of the Critical Role Mighty Nine anthology, Stories Untold, and I get to write everyone's favorite shopkeeper, Pumat Sol, in that. So I am definitely going to be busy this year. And I would say, though, if you have read this book and you want more in the vein like it, and you haven't picked up Outlaws yet, it's pretty cheap and accessible now, and it's a lot of the bugs from launch have been fixed. So go zoom around Tatooine and take pictures of banthas like I did. That's what I did. And I would say, if for people who are reading this first, like, it was written to be standalone, and the Lucasfilm team had some of their staff like beta read it, like where they hadn't played Outlaws, and to make sure that, like, does it work as just an underworld story, and they felt very strongly that it did. But I think if you read the book and then you play Outlaws, you're going to have a different experience than playing Outlaws and then reading the book. Tom had actually suggested that it's like, did you start with The Phantom Menace or did you start with A New Hope? Because that is a completely different experience, and you only get to experience it one way, based on what you choose. So, plus you get more of the sexy droid in there, which is very important.
Well, I went back and watched quite a few cutscenes after rereading the book, especially between Indy and Jaylen and Sliro, and they hit harder. It was great.
Plug too that the audiobook is performed by Jay Rincon and Eric Johnson, so ND and Jaylen respectively. So as the point of views alternate, you get their respective narrator. All of ND's dialogue is also processed, so it sounds like that sort of droid tone of ND5. And for when I got my my preview copy of it, I went to the very last chapter right away, which well, I guess like we're in the spoiler section, but to have, I wrote very specifically in there, "Hello, Nix," because I love when you're on the Trailblazer and Indy just is like talking to Nix, and he says, "Hello, Nix," and so I wanted to get that in there, and it gave me all the feels of like, okay, it's not defined. Like, is it during the game? Is it after the game? Like, we don't really know, but you know that they're safe and happy there. And that was really important. So it's just like, they're out there, they're together.
I do think like the epilogue really pushed the book over the edge for me, where it was like, it starts out about Jaylen and then it kind of gets to be more and more about Indy. And then you get that epilogue where, he's got his team again.
Yeah, it was really important. So that actually came about, like, it was not in the original synopsis, and we were in a meeting and someone we were talking about how we all felt bad for ND, and then someone said like, oh too bad we can't just time jump ahead, and I'm like, can we? And then I'm like, I'll just write it and you guys decide if we can keep it. And then like I turned in the manuscript, and then when it came back, Gabby was like, they let you keep the epilogue. I'm like, yes,
that was the right choice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about the book with us. I know you're busy. You're doing a lot of this now. So I had a great time talking with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. And, anytime something else comes up, hopefully they bring me back. I would love to come on and talk for another hour.
I hope so. Anytime. Thank you again, Mike, for taking some time out of your day to talk about Low Red Moon. The book is out now, and I've linked to Mike's socials in the description. Also, Mike, never apologize for standing up for what's right on your blue sky. But that's it for today. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.